play a game?
Why, yes, I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for tuning in. And Shane Plays is when I play. It's games, it's comic books, it's geeky stuff, it's movies, anything that can be considered geeky goes. However, one of my favorite things is games and tabletop role-playing games in general. And today's show is a fantastic show, and I'm so extremely pleased to have our guest and thankful for his time. And it is David Zeb Cook, who, to say that that he is a veteran of the RPG industry is almost a ludicrous understatement. He's done so much and been there practically from the beginning, and he's also just a very nice guy. And when I asked him at North Texas RPG Con a couple of weeks ago if he would consider coming on the show, he was like, sure. So I just really appreciate that. By all accounts, you also run a mean game of BX. Your BX games at North Texas are always well attended. And am I right in understanding that you run for up to like 15 people or something? You run a very large game?
Well, yeah, I do have one game that is for 16 players.
Yeah.
And it is an exercise in crowd control.
Well, it sounds fun. I always hear, people are like that your games are a must. And I'm an idiot. I always sign up for my games late in North Texas. And so I still end up having fun, but there's games that I don't get into that I would love to get into, such as yours, for example. So I'm going to try to be better next year and sign up when the signups first happen. So you joined TSR. What year was it that you joined?
1979.
1979, which was still very early in the history of RPGs and also the history of TSR. And just to put it into perspective, some of your very important contributions to Dungeons & Dragons and the tabletop RPG hobby, you wrote the original expert set for Dungeons & Dragons. So you had, I believe it was Moldvay did the original. Well, you had Holmes, then you had Moldvay, and you did the blue expert box, right? So
Tom did the basic box, yes, and I did.
You're the X in BX when you say B/X is Zeb Cook. You also basically, even though it has Gary Gygax's name on the cover, from what I understand, you did a tremendous amount of work, if not the majority of the work, on Oriental Adventures for.
I did all the work on Oriental.
You did all the work. Okay. So you wrote Oriental Adventures, which is, I remember getting that hardback when it first came out and just being fascinated. And I think I rolled up a Ninja immediately because they were just too cool. So you did that, and you're also responsible for the Planescape setting, which is one of the more highly regarded settings for Dungeons & Dragons. And that, I mean, you're involved in so much more. Those are just some of the very tips of the iceberg that a lot of people will recommend or recognize. And I believe, if I understand correctly, you were with TSR for roughly 15 years?
Yeah, I think I always get confused. I think I left in 94.
Okay.
It's like it gets to be a blur after a while.
Sure.
And he did leave out that I wrote the AD&D second edition too. So just
how could I forget to mention that? Yeah, that's kind of a big one too. So
I also wrote the Escape from New York board game.
Did you really?
Yes.
So did you ever get to sit down and play that with Kurt Russell?
No. I'm not sure he even knows it exists.
That it exists. So, I can't believe I totally blanked on that. You wrote second edition basically for, which is, again, a lot of people hold second edition up as their edition. I mean, they're like, this is the edition. Because it captured the feel of first edition, but cleaned up the rules a lot. And even though Thaco had been around before then, it made Thaco the norm. And I'm a big Thaco guy. I have no problem with armor class going lower. I'm okay with that, Zeb. I can handle it. So it was stuff like that was part of the charm and mystique of D&D to me, actually, just having to learn how the rules worked. So you also worked on stuff that a lot of people don't know, the wide variety of games that TSR was putting out at some point. I mean, they did a Bullwinkle game, they did Dynasty.
I
mean,
wrote the Bullwinkle game too.
You wrote the Bullwinkle game, which had hand puppets. It had hand puppets in it, and it sounds like a heck of a lot of fun. So, Escape, I'm looking at your Wikipedia page right now. I know Wikipedia can't be wrong ever, right? So
I don't know. They think I'm much older than I really am.
really, how old do they think you are?
It's some crazy number.
Yeah. All right. But it's not.
But they don't have
right.
me down as dead yet, so that's good.
That's good. At least they got that right. So, okay. And according to Wikipedia, so I want to see if this is right or not. You were a high school teacher at one point, and your students gave you the nickname Zeb.
Yeah, that's true.
Because
they could call me worse things, so I let them get away with it.
Yeah, Zeb's a good nickname. And then you've got evidently your signature. It kind of has a stroke in it, resembling a Z, and then also you had a resemblance to James Arness character Zeb McCann.
I don't know what character it was, but I think my students decided I looked like some character in a TV Western.
Yeah, How the West Was Won. So that's where
I'll have to go look this up, and because James Arness, I could do worse.
You could do worse, yeah. So anyway, yeah, and then and other things you've done. You worked on Conan the Barbarian for TSR, Crime Fighters, Adventures of Indiana Jones, Star Frontiers. I love Star Frontiers. That's a personal love of mine. Sirocco, Escape from New York. You worked on a lot of well-known modules for D&D. You did Oriental Adventures, second edition, AD&D back when it was still AD&D. And then, one of the things, and we'll talk more about your tabletop RPG stuff. I imagine most people who listen to this episode will be interested in that. But a trend I've noticed is that a lot of veteran tabletop RPG designers end up in the video game industry, and you're certainly part of that mix. I was talking with Janelle Jaques at North Texas, and she was at Coleco and was heading up all the Coleco video game stuff. So yep. Jeff D, I think go ahead.
She was at Coleco actually with Lawrence Schick, who used to work at TSR. And so a lot of us wound up in the video game industry, for, practical reasons, and also kind of, the fact that it was like a big unknown challenge. And, after doing role-playing games for 15 years, it was like, video games were still this new thing, and you could look at them and see like, wow, they're really cool and they're really interesting, but they're missing a lot of opportunities, because they hadn't yet figured out a lot of what they have now. Like, oh yeah, hey, we can do, DLCs and all this sort of stuff and turn it into a line as opposed to just a game. But the really important factor is that video game companies, as a rule, paid better. That was tough to argue with.
People often forget that tabletop role-playing and the business around it is a business. And, the people have to make money that are involved. And we do is see the fun end of it, right? It's like, oh, we're rolling dice, we're having fun with our friends, we're telling these amazing, crazy stories. But there's a huge business side to it. So, and, I don't know many people, there's a few, but I don't know many people in the current RPG industry that do it full time.
It's really hard, to do it full time. I think when I first started at TSR, Jim Ward, who was my boss at various times when I was there, but he had a very favorite saying about basically game designers that he pointed out, quite in his very cheerful kind of serious voice, that there are more professional astronauts than there are, professional game designers.
Oh, how funny. Yeah, I guess at the time that was true, wasn't it?
Yes, it was
Yeah.
very much.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty funny. And Jim Ward, of course, was he designed a lot. I'm trying to think off the top of my
Oh,
head.
Gamma World, Metamorphosis
Yeah, he did.
Alpha, Deities and
Yeah.
Demigods. Um,
Yeah, and that's why it's fascinating to talk with people such as yourself that were there. Because to you, Jim Ward was a coworker, right? You know him very well. You worked under him, you worked with him. But to us, it's like, oh, it's Jim Ward, right? Oh, the name up in lights. So which brings to mind one of my favorite stories from North Texas RPG Con. It wasn't this one, it was 2 years ago, 2019. And I've shared this on the podcast before when I was talking about the con, but I was talking, I think like Alex Kammer was there and Bill Meinhardt, John Peterson, some other folks were just hanging out at the bar and talking. And you walked up, I guess you were in between games or something like that. And like Alex or somebody said, you want a beer? You're like, yeah. So you're just sitting there hanging out, drinking your beer. And right in front of you, they're having this discussion about how somebody had tracked down all these old TSR memos. They weren't game design documents. They weren't, anything of that would most people think of as historical significance, but they were employment memos regarding you,
oh my God.
like memos they had given to you or something about like, I don't know, the nature of your job, or I don't know what it was, but it was just regular business stuff. And they were discussing these things like Indiana Jones had just lifted them, out of some strange crypt. I mean, it was like this archaeological find. And you were just sitting there kind of hanging out while because I think they were already talking about it before you walked up. So it was already a point of discussion. And I looked over at you and I was like, I have to ask, what does that feel like that, this is just to you, it's just like your old employment stuff. And people are treating it like it's, the Shroud of Turin. And you just kind of took your swig of your beer and you went, oh, it's cool. And then you kind of went back to whatever you were doing. So yeah, you had a very non-diva attitude about it. And I felt like you gave me a genuine, honest answer without, trying to wax forth and, make a big deal about it. So what is that? I mean, is it commonplace for you now for people to like, cause I can think of the job I had 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And if somebody came up to me and was like, I found half a piece of paper from your desk, I'd be like, yeah. I mean, well, what is that like to?
Well, it's a lot like, yeah, because they found, I have a feeling that probably half of the memos they were discussing, I probably didn't even remember,
Right. Exactly.
Oh, okay, there's some paper out there. um, but, it's people, occasionally people kind of bring these things up, but for the most part, most people are, first off, you're talking about a group of guys there, John Peterson and stuff, who are very much into that digging out all of the not just the game design kind of stories, but all the business side stories about TSR. And so, yeah, so for him, these are things that he has been searching for hard, and so to get them is like really interesting. And he then takes those and writes up like these histories that cover events that frankly I was there and I didn't even know about.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, it's coming under a scrutiny that I'm sure is fascinating to you. And honestly, what John and Alex and like people don't know Alex Kammer, and Alex Kammer does Game Hole Con. He also has the Game Hole, which is just a cool gaming area. I'm not sure if I don't think it's a game store, but it's a cool place that people like to play games.
It's his game space. Yeah.
Right. His game space, which is getting kind of legendary. People like to visit it. But he's a big collector. Bill Meinhardt, I've had him on the show before. He's a collector. I mean, he's got the largest fantasy RPG collection in the world. John Peterson, of course, wrote Playing at the World and The Elusive Shift and everything. And I think the work they're doing is important because the amount of impact that tabletop role-playing games and D&D in particular have had on pop culture and thereby culture is very important. And even it's only been, close to 50 years since TSR was established. D&D came out, 74? And it's already getting hard to establish the record. So, I salute what they're doing. But, and I know you've been asked this before, but I have to ask again. Did you guys and gals have any clue whatsoever of the lightning in a bottle that y'all were dealing with?
Yes and no. I mean, we especially during the first 2 or 3 years there when we were going through the crazy kind of meteoric rise period, you kind of knew that wow, this thing is taking off, and so there was a lot of pressure to deliver because we were originally just a small little company, kind of churning out things kind of whenever we could, but not at a fast pace. And then suddenly it's like, oh my God, people want this stuff. We need a lot of it now, fast. And so it shifted from, all right, we're going to do 5 or 6 products a year to how many products can we get out, and and how much, and we weren't for a while, we simply could not keep up with the demand from basically Random House and other people that they, because they wanted this stuff because it would sell. And so, there was definitely we all stumbled into something. At the same time, the no part is none of us had any idea of this whole longer term kind of result that has happened since. People are talking to me about stuff that I did 30, 40 years ago, and remembering it and actually and still playing it. And none of us expected anything like that. We figured, we're working with this cool company, and they want lots of stuff, and we didn't really think about what will be our legacy in the future, because we didn't think we had a legacy.
This is what's hot right now, but I guess it'd be impossible to look down the road 40, 50 years. And, because they say D&D is more popular now than it's ever been, according to WotC.
Yeah, and that's the crazy part, is that we've seen these cycles happen and we're on a big upswing.
Talking about, like you wrote, Expert, BX is still my preferred D&D. I love playing BX. When I go to North Texas, or I don't know if you've met Carl Heil. He goes to North Texas a lot, but he runs a mean game of BX, and I love playing BX. I have a folder right here, or a binder that has the original BX books in it, because they're hole punched, and I keep that with me in my game bag. So your legacy has lasted. I played a little bit of AD&D once or twice, but the first edition of D&D that I remember just looking through the books and just being blown away, and was the BX rules, and just, I'm 4th level now, and, going and looking at all the stuff and the spells and all that. And so, and I still get a little bit, some of it's nostalgia, but some of it's because I genuinely enjoy the game. I still get a little twinge of that now anytime I open up the books.
It is the game I always run at conventions, is the BX games. And mostly it's because I don't have to carry a whole lot of books with me when I go to a convention. And the other thing is, the rules are so simple and so kind of basic.
Yeah.
What do you say? Basic expert, right? That you don't have to spend a lot of time explaining things to players. But, they just go oh, this is what I am, and this is what I can do, and okay, we move forward. And then finally, the last part is that there's so few rules that if you start making stuff up, you're kind of expected to make stuff up, which is kind of the way I do things in games anyway. So when I start making stuff up, nobody goes like, hey, wait a minute, there's a rule for that on page 87 of something, you know?
Which there's an argument to be made too for comprehensive games. I'm not down on that if that's what people like. But yeah, there's between the purity of the rule set and the nostalgia and just everything, I love BX. I play that, and I like Back Me, the basic expert companion, Masters and Immortal Rules. Frank Mincer, of course, did the Red Box several years later and redid basic and all that. But BX is, I like BX. I like first edition AD&D. I like I like second edition, and I like, if people want to check out BX or some adventures, if people aren't already familiar with some of these older adventures, they can check out the Goodman Games does these original adventures reincarnated that are amazing, where they take these original adventures and they give you the original modules, copies of the original print versions, and they'll put different versions in there if there were variations. They'll give you articles explaining the history, and then they'll also give you a 5th edition conversion. So I love those very much. And they did one for Isle of Dread. You wrote Isle of Dread, right?
Oh, yeah. They asked me to write a piece on that and for them, and I swear they managed to basically take Isle of Dread, which was a pretty slim little module, and found enough other material to turn it into a pretty hefty hardcover book for them. That
those are some of my favorite things being produced in the RPGs right now, are those original adventures reincarnated. Well, we'll get back to, I want to put a bookmark here because I got myself off of the topic that I wanted to be talking to you about briefly, and that was video games. What do you do? And I know that you're on a project you can't talk about, so I'm not trying to get into that, but what has been your history with video games? I see that you worked on City of Villains, which I think was the companion MMO to City of Heroes for Cryptic.
Yeah, I was the lead designer on City of Villains.
And then you worked on Fallout 2, which is a classic. What did you do with Fallout 2?
Well, Fallout 2 was a situation where that Fallout came out and it was very successful, and Black Isle didn't really have any real like, oh yeah, we're going to immediately follow up with Fallout 2. But they kind of like realized, got told, whatever, that, hey, you guys need to make a Fallout 2 and get it done quickly so that we can get it out. So literally every designer in Black Isle, I think, or almost every designer in Black Isle, got pulled into working on Fallout 2, and the way we wound up doing it is we each got like a chunk of the map.
Oh, okay.
And so I had a couple of towns, and it was like, okay, come up with like content for this stuff, right? And for this town, work it all out. And then the main designers were kind of responsible for, making sure it all stitched together and made sense, and also getting the main kind of story that would go through all of this. But it was kind of a Fallout game, so it needed lots of other content. And so so a whole bunch of us worked on Fallout too.
Right? Yeah, it's like all hands. Sounds like
it wasn't all hands on deck kind of thing.
Did you work very closely with Chris Avallone?
Yes, we were. Yeah, he was actually. When he was working on the Planescape game, I was also at Black Isle, and I was actually working on another Planescape title that they were going to do. Except about halfway through the process, the company said, "Wait a minute, if we do the second Planescape, we've already got one Planescape title, which is kind of like what the contract required, and if we do the second one, we're going to have to pay them money." Off of the sales. So maybe we should actually do this as as a Stonekeep title, which was an IP that they had, intellectual property they had. And so they came to us about halfway through and says, okay, guys, can you convert that over to a Stonekeep thing? And it's like, I suppose.
So yeah, Planescape and Stonekeep are a little different, but okay.
Well,
So,
there was some negotiating and horse trading. I think we got him to agree that we could do we could shift over to do it as do a Stonekeep title, provided that we didn't have to pay any attention to what the previous Stonekeep had been.
okay, well, fair enough, I suppose.
And then of course the perils of working on a game that where they're building the engine for it and all this while you're trying to do the game actually resulted in the fact that the Stonekeep thing never came out.
Right. So it was kind of doomed from the beginning. It sounds like
It was a little bumpy ride, yeah.
So do you think? I know that Planescape Torment is really beloved in CRPG history. That's another.
Oh yeah, it's a really fine game, and Chris and Colin did a really good job.
So we're being the creator of the Planescape setting. You felt that it respected the setting and told a good job in the setting.
Yeah, I think they there were points that we would disagree about, but they were down the hall, and every once in a while I would kind of poke in and see what was up, but for the most part, kind of did not try to tell them what they should do, because figured that probably wouldn't work, and it needed to be their project if it was going to really fly. So
that's fair. Yeah. Well, it's a great game, and I mean it's considered one of the best computer role playing games of all time. So it's got some great. I mean, the storytelling now has matured so much in computer role playing games, but at the time it came out, it was very groundbreaking in the approach to the storytelling. So
yeah, they did some cool things.
Yeah. So what did you do with now when you say that you were the lead designer on City of Villains, what does that mean exactly?
Well,
because I know that title can mean different things at different
it does mean different things in different places. So with City, it was essentially a sequel to City of Heroes. It was kind of a co-companion piece to City of Heroes. So it wasn't like having to sit down and do a lot of the really core basic design, working out what the MMO mechanics were going to be and all that, because we had all that already. So really a lot of what the lead design work on that was figuring out the setting. How do we tell stories where you get to be a villain without having you be an absolute unlovable, and still have good stories and peril and all this sort of stuff. Then how do we get that to kind of merge up with the City of Heroes stuff? So a lot of it was working out just the locations and all this sort of stuff, setting out a lot of the storylines, and then basically working with the team to get all the the content put together. We had to work out what new classes were we going to do, what kind of to just try and make sure it kind of retained a cohesive shape, and that that it met the goals and the targets that our creative director wanted too.
It almost sounds like you were a producer, like you were a producer.
I'm doing a lot of designing. We had producers.
Okay, I'm just saying because producers, if you're an executive producer in the movies, that means you're contributing money, but producers also bring people together and keep them on track.
But a lead designer in most places spends more time working with his team, with his team of designers to get things put together than a lot of times when they actually do real hands-on design. A lot of it is looking over what other people have done and making sure that yes, that's what I wanted, or that's a great idea. Let's figure out how we can what we can do with that, or oh wait, you've kind of strayed off and this isn't really the kind of game we're making. We need to kind of bring this back, whatever, those sorts of things.
Gotcha. All right, so you went from You worked on City of Villains. You also worked on. It looks like a MMO that didn't come out, but it was based on the Stargate
Yes. Oh
IP.
my God, the
Yes.
Stargate thing. That was kind of sad in the sense that it was an outfit in Phoenix, Arizona that basically formed to make this game, and they had management who had never done anything related to games before in their lives. And then they had but then that that was the senior upper level management. But then they hired, some executive types that had actually done games. So that was good. But so we had the Stargate license. And if you think about it, it was really a really perfect kind of vehicle for an MMO, because Stargate's all about teams, small teams working together, like four main characters, whatever, and basically going off to new worlds, having adventures, and then coming back to a home base thing. And so it had that kind of perfect. This will work really well for an MMO, but ultimately, it wasn't the team or anything was the problem. Ultimately, the problem became there were strange shenanigans going on about the money and financing.
Oh, it's a shame.
And before it all completely went to hell, I had actually already left. But
saw the writing on the wall. I take it.
Yeah, there were definitely some indications that things were not going well.
That's a shame, because that sounds like it would have been a fun game.
Like weird, legal, financial problems, and all the money suddenly disappeared, kind of a thing.
No, that's a problem when you're wanting to be employed. So you want to be somewhere that has money. I hate to hear that, though, because I agree that that sounds like a great setup for an MMO. And it's you've got a built-in plot device to where you can just have all these wildly different adventure types, depending on what world you go to, where you go through the gate. So, and then, it sounds like it would have been a lot of fun. So hate that did not launch. So now, did you go straight from there to ZeniMax?
Oh, no.
With the Elder Scrolls? Okay. All right.
From there, I went back to Austin because I had done a stint with a company in Austin before that, and worked on another MMO that was a startup, but it was a startup being done by people who had made games before, so they kind of knew what they were getting into. And we were working with a Korean publisher and kind of working on our prototype and all that. That went along pretty well for a while, and then the executive in Korea, who was kind of our main point of contact person, apparently got replaced, and suddenly they were like, "Well, what is this thing that these guys are doing, and why do we want it?" Kind of a thing. And
you lost your advocate, yeah.
Yeah, and so that one went down too. Then I wound up at ZeniMax Online, where basically I spent 10 years, long time, God, I was 10 years working on Elder Scrolls Online, of which about 3 or 4 of those, I think, were before the game even shipped. And then 6 more years after that, continuing to make content and, lead teams to build content and everything for the game. That one, hey, the game shipped and we've been successful, and it was it's very rewarding to work on a game that is successful.
Yeah, that's successful and shipped. Not only shipped, but successful. I mean, some friends and I have just decided to we played an MMO for quite a while, and now we've swapped over to the Elder Scrolls Online, and we're checking it out. So, and it's got a big new release and content update. So, and I've heard my friend Matt Barton, who interviews a lot of video game developers on his Matt Chat channel. He interviewed somebody from Elder Scrolls. I think it may have been one of the original developers, and I was really impressed with how deep the lore goes with Elder Scrolls. Evidently, the lore is just like, it's almost like Tolkien level.
There are volumes of lore.
Yeah.
Scrolls, yes.
So, do you have game Bibles you have to consult when developing content?
We had a guy who we had Lawrence Schick, who actually hired me at TSR. He was one of the first designers at TSR. He hired me at TSR. And then he left to go off and work at Coleco and some other video game companies. And then he eventually hired me to my first video game company that he was in the process of setting up for some folks. So he got me into the video game business. And then when I got hired at ZeniMax, I found out he was working in the office next door.
Oh, funny. You're like, well, hello again.
Yeah. But he was officially the lore master for Elder Scrolls Online. And basically it was his job to make sure that all that, massive amount of lore and stuff that we stayed true to it. That we, if we created more lore stuff, that it fit with all the stuff that existed, and occasionally to kind of like make the case to Bethesda when we wanted to do something that they were like, we don't know about, right? And we're not sure about that,
right?
And we didn't win all of those, but
Well, as a matter of fact, I looked it up, and Lawrence Schick was the person that my friend Matt Barton interviewed. He was the one that made the impression on me on how deep the Elder Scrolls lore went. So.
Oh, yeah, and Lawrence has a great mind for this sort of stuff because he can remember it, and he likes digging out all the details and sort of stuff. But he also is very creative and can add more to it.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to him sometime for sure. Am I right in remembering that he wrote one of the first books sort of on the history of role-playing games?
He did. He wrote a book. Okay. What was it called?
See if I can find it.
It's basically a kind of an encyclopedia of, because he's very much a collector, and so it was kind of an encyclopedia of all of these different role playing games and systems that had come out until about 1990 or so. That came about. I think that was about the time the book got published. And he had written basically short descriptions and kind of analysis of each of them, and he was very thorough. He would find games nobody or only a few people had ever heard of.
Yeah, here it is. Heroic Worlds.
That's it. Yes.
A history and guide to role playing. Yeah, I remember Bill Meinhardt said that Lawrence was one of the people that Lawrence interviewed, I guess, trying to track all this stuff down. Yeah, it's paperback on Amazon. You can get for as cheap as $60, and a hardcover you can get as cheap as $440.
Yeah, it's been out of print for a long time.
Worlds. Yeah, just a little while. So, but yeah, he's obviously an important name. You were the third full-time designer brought on staff at TSR. Is that correct?
I think so. Second or third. I'm not quite sure. Somewhere in there. I know I was employee number 24.
Okay, so he hired you.
Yeah. So
yeah, he's pretty important to the history of TSR as well. So, all right, I can spend a lot of time on the video game stuff because I mean that's a big part of my interest as well. But I know a lot of people, want to hear more about the tabletop RPG history. So when you joined TSR, if I understand right, you had to take some kind of design test.
Oh yeah.
To kind of prove you had some chops. Yeah, and they hired you. Lawrence Schick hired you. At that time, I know because I know D&D came out in 74 and it, went crazy over the next few years. So when you came to TSR, did it already have some mystique for you, or you're just like, okay, this is just a cool job for the moment, or were you like, wow, I'm at TSR?
I was pretty excited to be there because I had been playing, role-playing games since, I'd been playing Dungeons and Dragons since about 74 or 75 by that point. And, so getting to come work for the place that made, Dungeons and Dragons was like, wow, this is really cool. This is a job I really want to do. It was pretty exciting. Then, we had to accept certain hardships in order to do that, but
right. So what was the size of the company when you started? Was it still running like basically out of?
It was basically it was one building, the old Clare Hotel in downtown Lake Geneva, a building that was, I think, on the verge of being condemned. Yeah, I'm not kidding.
Well, it's the perfect place to play games then.
Well, the bottom floor was the hobby shop that was open to the public. The second floor was basically like the art department and the kind of the executive offices where Gary and a few other people, all that were, and then the third floor was pretty much all of design and editorial, where we basically made stuff, made and
right.
And it also had Tom Wam's office, which was always interesting because Tom Wam wasn't actually an employee, but he had space and he had an office in the building that was where he would show up whenever he felt like it. And so he was kind of like that man of, the mystery guy that people would cite on the floor and not know who he was.
Yeah, who is it? So was he just like a buddy of Gary's? I mean, why did he have space?
Well, because he was a buddy of Gary's, and but he was also Tom Wam's also a very he's a really clever designer for board games.
Okay.
But he's also the kind of guy who he doesn't design board games to necessarily like, oh, I'm going to design this board game so I can sell it to somebody. He would design board games because he liked board games, and then he would play that. He would bring the games he designed to like conventions or to friends, and they would play them, and they go like, right. And every once in a while, somebody would like have to convince him, like, hey, we can publish that.
Right. Oh, okay. So he just loved board games for board games' sake.
Yeah, and he would publish them when he wanted, when he needed some money and that sort of stuff, and
nice.
Yeah.
So when you started in 79, if you mention Gary Gygax or Dave Arneson these days, there's already the layers of mystique have been added, right? They've become figures in a lot of people's minds beyond just, regular average Joes that you would hang out with. So did Gary already have that kind of perception in the gaming hobby at that point? Did you feel sort of starstruck to be around him or the other folks? Or at that point, was it just kind of like, oh, it's Gary Gygax?
Not so much starstruck, but,
right.
he was clearly much more, he was busy running a company that was employing all of us, and so it's like he was our boss. He was
right.
But when I went to TSR for my interview, basically Gary was one of the people who was part of needed to interview me, and so wound up going out to his house. Because he often wasn't in the office. He often worked at home and this sort of stuff. And spent most of the evening talking with him, and literally, instead of being put up, this was giving me an idea just kind of like how I guess amateurish is probably the right word, but it seems a little harsh that TSR was at the time. But it's like they flew me in for an interview, and they didn't have a hotel room for me. Instead, I wound up sleeping on a couch in his on his porch.
So he treated you like a gaming buddy who had come in, or like another gamer.
He sat and we talked for a long time, and he asked questions and told stories, and then that's where I spent the night.
How funny. All right. So I guess you were there for roughly 15 years. So you saw it go from like one building into like more of a corporate type. They ended up with like kind of a campus, kind of like what, you saw it really grow, I guess.
Yeah, we went from the one building, and then eventually we moved out to this old, I can't remember, it was like a car, van conversion plant or something like that, basically, but it had a big warehouse and it had office space for all of us. And, so that was like, wow, now we're a real company.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as it grow, I can only imagine that you lose some of that intimate family feeling the more you grow. Did you ever hit a point where you're just like, feels corporate and I don't like this anymore?
Oh, I don't know if it was like, there were times when things were frustrating because there were times when, management would make decisions that we were going like, why are we doing this? This is really dumb.
Right.
And believe me, there were some really dumb decisions made. But you still, there were still only at tops, there were about 300 people in the company, and that included all the warehouse personnel and everything. And so you knew most people.
So it was never so big that you felt like that you were in, some big faceless corporation.
No, we felt like we were in some small faceless corporation. Actually, it felt like at times like we were in a small business that wanted to pretend it was a big corporation. And so it was, at times that they would try to get all official because, this is how corporations are supposed to do things. And, it's like, oh,
right.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So, and I don't look for scandal. I don't look for, gossip or anything like that. That's not where my show goes. But are there any of those, you said, they made decisions that were some dumb decisions. Is there anything you feel comfortable sharing?
Well, I mean, some of it is, it's not secret, but it's not well known. They were always very interested in getting into the into the gift shop kind of market, the gift store kind of market, which meant they needed an entirely different. You can't sell D&D books in a gift store all that well, but at some point they bought or took over some cousin, some relation to one of the three execs. They had a business called Greenfield Needlewomen, which was made little cross stitch kind of pattern things, and so suddenly we got into the cross stitch pattern business for a while.
What, like little beholder cross stitch patterns in gift shops?
It wasn't even like they were. I don't even think they were really trying to do like really D&D themed ones. So just,
right. They just wanted to get into
sell
gift
these
shops.
cross stitch things.
All right.
Yeah, and
they probably love it today. All the little collectible items that are involved today, they'd probably love that. That stuff's in gift shops. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about, you worked on some high profile stuff that's fondly remembered. Just as a reminder, you worked on the expert rule set from BX, which is very important. That's what took people past level 3. So they bought the basic rules and they got to level 3, and what next?
It does end kind of abruptly there.
Yeah. So here comes Zeb Cook with the answer. So you worked on that. You worked on not just worked on, you were primary force behind second edition D&D, or AD&D. You basically did Planescape and Oriental Adventures, just to mention a few things. So what was the dynamic that you got to work on so many important? Was it just like there weren't enough designers to go around, or had you like proven your chops and so you were given this important stuff, or how did these things come about?
It depended a little bit on at times. So for like the basic and expert, we didn't have a whole lot of designers on staff at that point, so it was a little bit of who's got time, who's got scheduled time, but also because Tom and I had been kind of there the longest out of the designers that we had, they kind of said like, okay, you guys are the most experienced designers we have, so and we lobby for things too that we want to do.
Sure. Right.
So we wound up doing that, and then for AD&D, so that had been this thing that Gary had always talked about doing at some point, doing a second edition, and then company politics and all, he wound up on the outside. But the idea that we needed to do a second edition still existed, and Steve Winter, who is like one of our very senior editors, had started out by just saying we need to do an edition where we at least let's get this, rework this so that it is readable and organized and friendly to people, because AD&D, the original edition, is quirky in its organization and layout and stuff.
Yeah, I love AD&D first edition. I love the nostalgia of it. I love the rule set and all that. But it's hard to find stuff, and in some cases, the rules can even be contradictory.
Yeah. So it was to clean. The original idea was to clean it up. Just do that.
Right.
But
right.
Then we needed to get a team together, and again, at that point, I had been working there for 6 or 7 years by that point, and was probably one of the people that had been, had more experience kind of working with Gary, because I had to work with Gary on the Oriental Adventures thing. He had to approve all the stuff I was doing and all this sort of stuff, and had so kind of had.
Well, let me camp out there for a second. I know we'll go back to second edition AD&D,
okay,
but as long as you've brought it up, it's often said in the by hardcore fans, people that follow this kind of stuff in the RPG industry, that and I'm not looking to cast aspersions on Gary Gygax. I like Gary Gygax. I think he was important to the industry. There's a lot of great stories out there about Gary. However, as you pointed out towards the beginning of the discussion, like you basically wrote Oriental Adventures, but it's got his name on it.
Yeah.
So was that just like Rank Hathitt's privileges and he put his name on it, or
no?
And again, I'm not trying to catch shade on Gary.
No, it was more a this is one of those kind of more kind of like corporate, I guess, decisions kind of things, where basically they had committed to doing the Oriental Adventures book to Random House. At the time, they had never. The only other previous hardback that they had done after AD&D came out was the Unearthed Arcana. And Unearthed Arcana was, written by Gary and had his name on it. And they sincerely believed that it had to have his name on it, that was important, right, because otherwise, they wouldn't get the sales they wanted.
So it wasn't really Gary's decision.
It wasn't. I mean, Gary was in charge of the company, but I'm not going to say it was Gary's decision. I think it was
right. There were other people other than Gary saying we need to.
This needed to be done.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And
I guess. Yeah.
Then the person who was originally going to be doing the manuscript, or it fell through in a big way, and at that point they had this commitment to Random House that it still had to be done and delivered by a certain date, and they had lost a huge amount of time to get it done. So that's kind of where I got involved, because I had been, those of us who were working there knew that this person that was contracted to do it was probably incapable of delivering.
So you knew that even before it became, okay.
And so there have been a lot of, again, kind of lobbying and jockeying and kind of positioning myself. And I really liked Oriental subject matter anyway. To be involved, and so when things fell apart, then I was kind of in the position of, well, somebody's got to get this done, and so I had 3 months of very intense writing to do, designing and writing to do to get it done.
So did you basically start it from scratch, or did you take at least some of what had been done before?
No, I had to start it from scratch.
All right. Well, so did you decide because you had like the samurai and the ninja? I mean, you had some really cool stuff in there. So, the weapons were cool. So did you come up with all of that?
Yeah. Yeah,
that was a cool source book. In fact, I had a copy of the Oriental Adventures hardback with me at North Texas a couple of years ago, but the only time I saw you when I had it on me, I'd almost run you over with a luggage cart. So I was like, this is probably not the best time to ask for a signature. I almost just took Zeb Cook out at North Texas.
Thanks for killing me with the luggage cart.
Well, I did manage not to. I was like, and I looked around and, it's Zeb Cook I almost ran over. So anyway, but yeah, they generally frown on running over the VIPs at RPG conventions. So it wasn't that close of a call, but I could have taken you out if I wasn't paying attention. So you on the record, you did Oriental Adventures, which is one of the most fondly remembered, source books of first edition. I know it made a big impression on a lot of people. Now, and I'm not down on Unearthed Arcana. I thought Unearthed Arcana was really cool, but if I remember right, some of that was like collected from other stuff that had been published elsewhere, right?
A lot of it, parts of it came from Dragon Magazine articles Gary had done, and that's you compiled all these things and kind of like got them and put it all into a single thing, so everybody it moves them out of the, I saw this in an article in Dragon somewhere, which, then your DM goes like, well, I don't care. I don't care about that. Right. Yeah. Now it's an
official book.
It brought a bunch of the ideas and stuff that he had and kind of brought them all together, but, he wrote it. And so, hey.
Right. Fair enough. Yeah. No, I have fond memories of Unearthed Arcana. It seemed very cool and mysterious when it first came out. But I remember getting Oriental Adventures. It was in the summer. I remember that because it was a hot day outside. And I sat in my bedroom and just devoured that thing. And I remember I know I rolled up a ninja immediately. So I don't know. Anyway, it was really cool. All right. So back to second edition, which it started as, hey, we just need to clean up first edition, which I don't think there's anybody who wouldn't agree with that. Like, hey, first edition was super cool, but we need to clean up these rules. But then at some point it went over into more like, let's revise some stuff, or like, so what happened there?
Well, it did. It was kind of clean up stuff. And then, as you pointed out, there were some rules contradictions in there. So we probably needed to fix those. And then there were systems that didn't work well or that people argued about. Cause we'd get mail from people and all this, talk to people at conventions. There were a bunch of things that people couldn't agree. Like, is this how you're supposed to do it? Do you need to do this sort of stuff? Things like encumbrance, for example, that when you looked at it, we decided these things actually, yeah, it's great that it's in there for people who really want it, but it's not like you have to do these things. And then we started, that leads to, well, how are people actually kind of playing the game by this point? And what are the kinds of house rules that we've all had to come up with to solve some of these? And so, in a great extent, the goal was to basically turn AD&D into the game that people were then currently playing, because there have been 10 years of articles, lots of all this sort of stuff, and there were good a lot of good ideas and all this sort of stuff, and a lot of house rules that people just kind of like mostly all knew, but not necessarily. And so it was turning into that. And then on top of that, there's a certain amount of creativity. It was like, let's incorporate what we liked out of Unearthed. What are the things that worked out of Unearthed Arcana? We should bring those in. What were some of the things in Oriental Adventures and some of the other books that worked particularly well and would help basically expand the game. And
yeah, so one of the things I can't remember, but Oriental Adventures, you introduced non-weapon proficiencies.
Yeah.
If I remember right.
Yeah.
Did that make it? I can't remember. Did that make it into second edition? It's been
It turned into the whole proficiency system.
That was the genesis of the whole system.
There.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff with like magic users and schools of magic and the cleric stuff were kind of ways to try and resolve we've got illusionists and we've got magic users, but what about all these other types? Wouldn't they also, trying to take the idea of what was there and then, expand it to where it would go, so, you can have an illusionist, you could have, an alteration specialist, you could have, a conjurer, all these sorts of things, and give people more freedom while still kind of like sticking to the same structure. You mentioned earlier on that you liked THAC0. You didn't mind that, armor class started at 10 and went down. That was actually one of the things we looked at seriously about, we thought we should really change that. It's goofy. Armor class start like at 0 or 1 and go up,
right.
But one of the other things we had to work with is the fact that, we had a lot of AD&D product out there. And we had a lot, and we still had AD&D product in the warehouse. And, our executives kind of wisely pointed out that they really didn't want us, that we can't go so far afield that it's not recognizable to people.
Right.
And so,
right.
So we decided that changing THAC0 would put too much of a burden on GMs and stuff who were trying to convert old material. That it was just better to leave it alone.
Well, now, if I remember right, okay, so in first edition AD&D and BX and all that, armor class always went down, right? The lower, the better, right? But in AD&D, the first edition, it wasn't technically THAC0 like every.
No, it was big. There was a table that
right
wasn't quite. We made some adjustments to the table to get the THAC0 to work smoothly in second edition, because in first edition, the table had some odd breaks in it at points that, so you couldn't just do this kind of simple formula that the THAC0 thing gave us.
So you did streamline it. Second edition, but you stuck to a similar mechanic.
Yeah, I didn't.
But I've heard
use the game that Gary had made or anything out of this. That wasn't the point.
Right. Yeah, I got you. All right, but yeah, a lot of people think THAC0 was from first edition, but it didn't become official until second edition. So, well, let me ask you this. Okay, so you wrote a column in Dragon Magazine when you were working on second edition, and you called it "Who Dies?"
Oh my God, that column!
So and you were talking about which character classes may be thrown out in the revision. So I'm not going to ask, did anybody scream? I'm going to ask, how loudly did people scream, and what was the class that they were most worried about?
Oh my God. People loudly screamed, yes. I mean, and frankly, that whole article, the whole point of it was to
Right.
stir people up a little bit.
You may have been stirring the pot
Because
just a little.
Yeah. So probably the one they screamed the most about was probably the assassin, I think.
Yeah.
Because, guys who had their assassins really like I can kill people with a single percentile die roll, right?
They loved the assassin. Yeah. People loved. There wasn't a lot of people that played them, but those that did loved them.
Yeah, they loved them, and everybody else in their group hated them.
Especially when intra-party conflict was more common back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure it still happens, but it doesn't seem to be as, people are more working together these days, it seems. So the assassin was the one that people begged to, ironically, don't kill the assassin. Right?
No,
don't
touch my
the assassin,
for God's sake.
Yeah, don't touch my assassin. So did it provoke the level of response you were hoping it would?
Oh, it provoked some. I mean, it got people like paying attention to what we were doing, and it got them aware that this was not going to be just we shined up the pages and fixed the typos kind of a revision, that there were going to be some changes, and so I guess it worked.
Well, I remember I was in, I'm trying to think what year second edition came out. Was it late 80s, early 90s?
It was about 89, I think, if I remember right.
I was in Misawa Air Base, Japan. I was in the Air Force, and is early 90, 91, and I was in the Stars and Stripes bookstore, and the first time I saw the second edition stuff for sale. And I bought the three. Well, I bought the Player's Handbook, the DM's Guide, and then of course it was the Monstrous manual, right? Because it had like the 3-hole punches. And
that was not a great idea.
Yeah. It's like it looks good on. I mean, I get the idea behind it. It's like you can just keep adding to it. But anyway, I bought all that, and I didn't, just on first flipping through it, I just, I was like, I ran it for people right off the bat, just with my knowledge of AD&D, so you did a good job of cleaning it up without completely changing the game. So, but yeah, I love that Who Dies. I wish I would have, I might go dig up those old Dragon, find those old Dragon magazines with the Who Dies responses and see, just make a blog post out of or something. I love that's such a role-playing game hobby conversation to have. I can see people sitting around arguing about it. So, all right. So you did second edition, and like when you say you led second edition, I mean, what does that mean? You led a team of designers, or like
it was mostly three of us. It was me. Okay. I would do the initial draft, and then Steve Winter was the editor, and then John Pickens was basically he was our playtest coordinator, and basically compiled all the results from playtests, because we had various playtest groups around the country that were giving us feedback and this sort of stuff. And it was a full-time job.
That's interesting that you bring that up, because, playtests are a big part. Public playtests I mean, to the point now where like Pathfinder second edition sold a playtest book that wasn't even the final, and people bought it, like this leather-bound playtest book. And then I think this new Marvel role-playing game that's coming out is going to do the same thing. In like Pathfinder, 5th edition, 4th edition, all that of D&D, they do these huge public playtests via the internet. So how many playtesters, like when you say all around the country, like what kind of playtest network did you have for second edition?
Well, they advertised, I think, through Dragon. They put out the request through Dragon for various. They wanted regular groups or clubs that played, so that we could get some kind of dependable response stuff. I think I'm probably just making this number up completely out of thin air. We probably had about 100 or so different groups around the country, and John would literally take the latest version of the manuscript, make copies for them, and get them shipped out, and along with all of the "this is what we want to know" kind of stuff, and then monitor them, make sure that pester them about are they
Right.
we haven't
How's
heard
it going?
anything.
Yeah. Right.
And then when it came back, he would then go through and compile all of that so that we could have it. And it was a huge amount of work.
Sounds like it.
And
I mean, I'm impressed that there was that level of effort put into playtesting,
and then
just based on what I would have assumed from back then.
even before we got even to the part where we were writing stuff and stuff, we would usually sit down. We would sit down as a group and kind of go through and talk about what we wanted to do, what could we do, and then we would actually present that to the rest of the design staff of, this is what we're thinking of. This is the kind of system we want to do here. These are the changes, and get their input. And sometimes, they were like, no, you can't do that.
Interesting. Right.
Yeah. And so because we were very conscious that, if we screwed this up, we were,
Right. Yeah. Right. Because even then you were like, yeah, right. I mean, it was the premiere and still is, role-playing game. Which kind of begs a question I want to ask here in a second. But getting back to the playtesting, how much of the feedback do you think, how much of the design that was actually made it into the final version of second edition do you think was influenced by playtesting?
Playtesting, the biggest influences were not so much we have to tear this whole thing out that we were going to do. It wasn't so much that. It was a lot more of, is it clear? Do they understand what did they get something wrong? That would be a big issue. The other one were a lot of issues of just number balance and things like that. Do the new classes feel balanced to each other? This sort of thing. And and if there was a lot of this isn't working, then we would go back and try and figure out how to fix it. I don't recall of anything ever directly being thrown out because of playtests, but a lot of things got tweaked and nudged and clarified and this sort of stuff, so that we can make a better product. Interesting.
So how long did how long did it take, do you think, the entire project?
I think it took us about a year and a half, I think, to do this. Yeah. And maybe, and they literally moved us, the three of us, out of the design department and stuck us in some offices that were down in some empty offices that were down in marketing, so that we could have privacy and just focus on this one task.
Nice. Yeah. So the company took it seriously.
No, they were, once they committed to it, they were very serious about trying to make sure it was done right.
That's nice. So what was the response when second edition first released? Were you happy with it? What was the response?
I was happy with it. I thought, and the response was good. And I mean, the public response seemed very positive. There are always people, for every edition, there are always going to be people who go, "Oh no, edition, the edition 3 editions back was far superior to this," right? And you're always going to get that. And you just have to accept that not everybody is going to agree. And that's just why we have these ever entertaining edition wars.
Yeah, the edition wars. Yeah.
But the sales seemed good at the time, although they didn't tell us a lot of the sales numbers, and we had to just kind of infer a lot of that stuff. My bosses seemed happy, so I was happy.
Yeah, that's a key indicator right there. Your bosses are happy.
Yeah.
So
I didn't lose my job over it. Let's put it that way.
Excellent. So, a question I kind of thought of a while ago, talking about working on, already you knew that you were working on an important project because this is the second edition of Advanced D&D, which is the big game in the industry. Are you surprised that Dungeons and Dragons has maintained? I mean, it doesn't just have a market lead. It has and I'm not down on any other games. I play a lot of different kinds of games. But if this was a race, I mean, D&D has lapped everybody else multiple times. Even now, when you have all these other wonderful games out there, are you surprised that Dungeons and Dragons has maintained this strong of a position in the industry? In the hobby?
Not really. I mean, I guess not really in some ways. I'm surprised that it has rebounded as much as it has in the last 4 or 5 years. That,
yeah,
and that's the fact that
mind-boggling.
I go now, and people playing it are in their 30s and 40s kinds of things and this sort of stuff. So I'm more surprised about that than in fact that D&D has kind of remained the dominant role-playing game, because it's not really there. There's a lot of space for a lot of other role-playing games, but when it comes to the broader public kind of like vision of stuff, you really pretty much have space for like one role-playing game when you kind of look at when you think about it.
Right.
And that's Dungeons and Dragons because the title's damn catchy and it's easy to remember.
That's true.
And two, that title also speaks exactly to what people's expectations are, what the fantasy is that's being sold here. And so the title and that stuff helps make it memorable. The fact that it had the momentum from the start, that everybody else was playing catch up at that point, meant that it got a lot more press time, good and bad, but it got more press time. People weren't talking about, that Aftermath role-playing game on the news. They were talking about, that Dungeons and Dragons game, even if it was some other game that they were actually talking about.
Right. Well, I mean, there, in the South, a lot of people say Coke when they mean any kind of soda. You want a Coke? Sure. What kind? Pepsi. So D&D has that kind of, like Xerox. I'm going to Xerox something when you might, who knows if you're using it. So D&D has that kind of dominant kind of mind share or whatever, when it comes to.
And it's really not until once you get into the role-playing game hobby and you're kind of like, wow, I really enjoy this. That's when you start looking around and you start seeing, hey, there are these other really interesting alternatives out here. I want to but it's very much kind of the gateway to the whole idea of role-playing stuff.
Yeah, as D&D goes, so goes the hobby, as far as, when a rising tide lifts all boats. So, there's a lot of stuff you've worked on that I could go into. I'm just going to ask you one more question about some of your design work, and I don't want to steal your entire night with this interview. With the expert rules and the Isle of Dread. Now, a lot of people probably don't realize that Isle of Dread was the first time that you had a wilderness style adventure where it was a hex crawl, if you will. Was that your idea? Where did that come from?
Well, I think it was the Isle of Dread was a joint idea between Tom and I because we co-wrote that, and it was literally, we needed to teach people. We needed to do some kind of a wilderness adventure because that was the whole point, was to show you, hey, the expert could be more than just, go into a dungeon and do stuff. Now you could actually go
kill stuff at 5th level instead of 3rd.
Explore a world.
Yeah.
We settled on the island, the monster infested island thing, because we both loved like old pulpy things like King Kong and giant dinosaurs in Lost Lands and all that sort of stuff. So that just seemed like, okay, we can do that. We put it on an island because we didn't have a world.
Smart.
Yeah,
you only had to have so much of a map.
Yeah, we had that one little map that was adapted from Mulvey and Schick had done stuff in a setting, and so that was adapted from there. But that was just kind of like info. But nobody really, there were people who were playing campaigns and stuff that this wasn't a new idea, but a lot of people, they didn't have a world. So we needed to have it be something that you could just easily integrate into whatever you had. So putting you on a boat, going to an island, it makes it stand by itself.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And so,
but to get to, so it was Tom and yourself, it was your idea that you needed to have a wilderness adventure. So it wasn't somebody else. I mean, y'all came.
I think we all kind of knew,
Yeah.
Lawrence, Tom, we all knew that, there had to be a wilderness adventure in here, because part of the goal of the adventure was to show you how to do, give you an example of how to do some of this. And if we just talked about it and didn't give you an example, then.
Right. Well, I think for its place in D&D and RPG history, I don't think a lot of people realize the ground that the Isle of Dread broke. It's the first hex crawl, as it were. So, and I can remember reading it, like taking it to school. I was one of those kids that I'm always reading a book in class. I'm never paying attention, and I'm hiding behind the person in front of me. And I can remember in 8th grade, just devouring the Isle of Dread. And as long as you're on an island, you might as well have dinosaurs.
Absolutely. There's nothing better than dinosaurs on an island.
There's nothing better at all. I mean, it encapsulates everything that makes life great. So let me finish here. And if there's anything else you want to bring up or mention, absolutely feel free. If you're like, I never get asked this one question, feel free to wax poetic on that. Nobody ever asks me about. Are you getting to play any games these days that are not related to work or going to a convention? Or do you get to game?
Last year, especially, that's been very difficult.
Yeah.
And I occasionally play games, but not mostly. And mostly I play computer games. I can play a lot of those.
You have any favorites you're playing? Obviously, you love Elder Scrolls Online more than anything else in the world. But other than that, do you have any other computer games you like?
World, good job. Make my corporate masters happy. Well, I'm playing, picked up Warframe again, just because, and played through like the Division and what is it? Isle of Tsushima, what was it? Not Horizon Zero Dawn, though I played the hell out of that, but that was a while back. There was one other one. A lot of the single player kind of adventure game things. I work on MMO kind of things all day, so
you don't play that. I gotcha.
I don't tend to play a lot of MMOs, and tired of dealing with people at that point.
Yeah, go away. let me kill computer representations of stuff. So, well, that brings up, and like I said, I'm not going to try to go down the rabbit hole on this, but Evidently, you co-wrote or whatever you wrote an adventure that ended up being adapted into one of my favorite games of all time, The Pool of Radiance. The Pool of Radiance is like a massively important. That was the first time I'd ever seen Dungeons and Dragons on the computer, and it blew my mind. I was like, oh, I can have fun playing D&D when I don't have a group of friends to get together with, and it just blew my mind. And it's just I still play it now. I have an ongoing game I pick up and play sometimes. So when you wrote that, did you know it was going to be for a computer game, or what was the deal there?
Yeah, actually, we actually wrote the computer game first.
Oh, okay.
Because SSI, I think that was SSI.
Yeah, it was SSI. Yeah, the gold box game. Yeah,
they had the contract with us, and we had done a few other games with them, and I think one other company, and they were fine. They were good games, but we wanted to, feeling like we weren't really getting the adventure, and they had the idea of like, hey, we'd like to have you guys involved in kind of coming up with the story and stuff, so we worked with them, and we worked out this kind of method. I'm not quite sure who came up with it, whether it was somebody on their side, somebody on our side, or just kind of where we really kind of focused on a lot of that story on taking the city of Flan back. Mm-hmm. And so we literally divided it into blocks that they could assemble as their map, and then we made little grid maps for each one of those. There was like a strict ratio of how many like blacked out squares we could have per map or something like this, right? Mm-hmm. They gave us a lot of like the requirements that they had to meet to like make it feasible for them. And then we divided that work up between a couple of us. Steve Winter, there was me, Jim Ward, and I'm not quite sure who else. There was somebody else. And we divided up the city and said, okay, let's put this all together like we would kind of doing an adventure, or a dungeon layout or whatever, right? And then added in the kind of the other wildernessy places that you went to out and around to kind of help to tell the story. I came up with the kind of the basic story of Tyranthraxus.
That is one of my favorite villain names in all of games, whether it's tabletop or who came up with the name Tyranthraxus. It's got such a great.
Oh, I did. I mean, come on, it's like tyrant and anthrax mixed together.
Great name. You can't.
How can you not think that this is a bad idea?
I love it. So you came up with Tyranthraxus? Yeah, because I hadn't even. I wasn't even that far into the game or whatever. One of my friends was like, I fought Tyranthraxus, and it just had such a great atmosphere to that name. So
yeah, it's got the wonderful evil dragon kind of name.
Yeah, no, it's such a great name. Well, Pool of Radiance is, I mean, I'm sure you're well aware, but it is massively well regarded. Not only is the first of the gold box games from SSI, but one of the best, computer role-playing games. I mean, it's just groundbreaking. So, in the game,
people play it now. They're going to go like, "What's so groundbreaking about this?" It's like,
I can't help if they can't appreciate the finer things in life. No, I love that. That just has such a great memory for me. And like I said, I still play it. I have a save game that I fire up and play every now and then. Clearing up the slums, man. So, I love. You may be shocked. You may not be aware of the regard that Pool of Radiance has in the computer role-playing game world. So, like I said, I co-authored a book. My friend Matt Barton, Dungeons to Desktops, the history of computer role-playing games, and Pool of Radiance gets a very big entry. So
I'll have to go look this up.
It gets a very big entry, and it's very well regarded in the history of computer role-playing games. So, and you've mentioned a name several times that I want to highlight real quick, because this person's name pops up a lot, but I feel like they don't get that kind of recognition that some of the other people there at the beginning. Steve Winter has been involved with so many things, but I hardly ever hear his.
He had been at TSR a very long time, and he's started as an editor, and it was principally an editor, but he's one of those editors who also really loved games.
Right.
Was very much a gamer, so that was a huge advantage for him, and also was a good designer. Was as good a designer as any of the rest of us when he had the opportunity, or is as good a designer. He's not dead.
He's a man who's alive.
As good a designer as any of the rest of us.
Yeah. Well, what is he up to these days? Do you know? Is he in the computer industry too, or the video game industry?
No, he does freelance editing and writes stuff for Wizards for the new AD&D line.
Okay.
And for various other people, Cobalt and other places.
Okay. Well, his name pops up so much with,
and he knows the history of this stuff, and he knows really well what's fun too.
Well, he co-designed one of my favorite games, which was the original Marvel superheroes from TSR. Him and Jeff Grubb, and I've got a lot. I thought that was a really well designed and fun game. So, and then his name just keeps popping up everywhere else. So, all right. Well, Zeb, like I said, there's so much more we could talk about, but at the same time, I don't want to, like I said, steal your whole life here. So, that's pretty much what I got, unless you have anything else that you want to add. I just want to.
I don't know. I can't think of anything right offhand. I mean, it got me talking about some things I hadn't thought about in a long time. Yeah. So that's pretty good right there.
All right. Well, I mean, I urge people to go look up David Zeb Cook online. Check out the Wikipedia entry, the RPG, the Board Game Geek, RPG Geek website entries, the bibliography and the history that Zeb Cook has in role-playing games. I mean, we could probably do an entire interview just on the work in the video game industry. Not to mention all of the, very important high points, not the least of which is stirring the pot with the Who Dies column in Dragon. Very, very important contribution to RPG history there. I'm going to go look those up. But in all seriousness, very important to many, many high points in Dungeons & Dragons and role-playing game history. I didn't even go into Star Frontiers. I'm a big Star Frontiers fan. And there's so much more stuff.
Oh, my God, Star Frontiers, yeah.
Yeah, I love it. There's Star Frontiers, a lot of people wanted to come back, but it seems to be in some sort of IP Hades, like nobody can get the rights to bring it back or something. I don't know. But evidently I've heard there's been attempts to try to bring it back. Oh, speaking of, I don't think you're associated with this at all, but I'm just curious, has anyone reached out to you, that Ernest Gary Gygax Jr. and some other folks have gotten the trademark for TSR now and are launching a new company with a game called like Giant Lands and all that. Has anyone tried to reach out? Because I know they're trying to bring some of the band back together. Is that on your horizon at all? Have you heard much about that?
I only just read about it the other day.
Okay, so what everybody knows, just like blog entry.
Yeah, I don't know anything more than anybody else at this.
Well, I know they were trying to bring some of the original names back. So, and it's just to be clear, it's not the TSR from the 70s and the 80s. It's same name, same trademark, some of the same people, but it's not the same IP in games and all that. So, just to be very clear on that. So, all right. Well, I have to do something to you, Zeb. I apologize, but it has to be done. I do a thing at the end of every show called the Bad Joke of the Week. So I'm
bracing myself.
You should be. I forgot to send you the waiver, so I hope that you don't have a lawyer on retainer, because this is pretty painful. But all right, are you ready for the Bad Joke of the Week?
I'm ready. I'm braced.
All right. How do you make a waterbed more bouncy?
I don't know. How do you make a waterbed more bouncy?
Well, you add spring water.
Okay, that was terrible.
Yeah, it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be.
It's a good dad joke. You can use
it. Is,
on.
Isn't it? Yeah, it is, isn't it? Okay. Well, thanks again for your time. This has been a real treat.
Thank you.
And I look forward to hopefully seeing you at further future North Texas RPG cons. And if I get in one of your games, if I'm lucky enough to get in one of your games, I can only hope that you one-shot my character in the very first round of the first combat. That would make me happy.
I'll take that under advisement.
Nothing makes me happier in BX to roll into a combat and get one-shotted. And then, like, Bob's, because it's like Bob the Wizard gets one-shotted, so immediately Bob the Second shows up right after that, right? So, but yeah, I love to get one-shotted. That makes my little grognard heart happy.
Oh, see, then you'll need to get into the 16-person Return to the Isle of Dread game that I do.
Yeah, only. Well, I hope I get one-shotted by a dinosaur.
That one has great. A high lethality rate.
Well, I'm there, man. I love lethal games. I love crazy. Just this dungeon crawl was a meat grinder. So, all right. Well, thank you so much again. I hope you have an enjoyable the rest of your evening.
All right. Thank you.
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.